In those instances, when you have so many options to choose from, it increases the likelihood that after you make the purchase or after you do the thing, after you go to the restaurant, that you're left with the feeling, what if? What if I chose the wrong place? What if there was a better, yummier restaurant that I could have gone to? What if there was a better, more perfect cut of jean for me? And those kinds of feelings create dissatisfaction and unhappiness, not only in the moment, but also for the length of the time that we own that item. We'll always like those jeans a little bit less than the jeans that we chose when there were fewer options. Hello and welcome back to my channel. If you're new, my name is Rachel, and today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. I thought it would be fun to just sit down and chat a bit. I have a particular topic on my mind, and honestly, I just wanted to, kind of talk it out and hear y'all's thoughts on it. So I've got a bunch of makeup down here. I'm just gonna put on makeup and we're gonna talk. I will try to mention the things that I'm using, but if I don't, I will definitely list them down in the description box. Okay, so Trader Joe's Daily Sunscreen, a must. Okay, so the topic that I wanted to talk about today, the thing that's been on my mind, is the idea of limitations. Wow, I'm almost out of this. This takes more dexterity than I have, let's be honest. Okay, multitasking. Not for the faint of heart. The topic that I wanted to talk about today is the idea of limitations and whether or not they might be the key to joy. So to give you guys context for this, the reason why this came up and the reason why I wanted to talk about it is because I was thinking about this time in my life. It was after college. For those of you who don't know, I grew up overseas. I grew up in China, and so anyways, I was overseas. It was after college. I'd moved home and I lived there for about a year. And in the city that I lived, there was only a very small movie theater. It was a relatively small city for China, still like millions of people, but relatively small. And so the theater was relatively small as well. And they only got like maybe 2 to 3 English speaking movies a year. Silicone-based SPFs always had me feeling weird at the end. They just don't absorb the same way, which I feel like if you're used to that and you're expecting that, then it's fine. But I'm always like perpetually rubbing them in because they never feel like they're absorbed, but I don't think that they're meant to. So the year that I lived there after college, only 3 movies came out in the theater that were English speaking. And one of them was Spider-Man with Andrew Garfield, and I think it was Jamie Foxx as the villain in the movie. And then The Edge of Tomorrow with Tom Cruise and Emily Blunt. And Snowpiercer, this movie with Chris Evans about this train that would pierce through the snow. I don't know. So I only watched that one once, the Snowpiercer one, but the other 2, I went back and I watched them over and over again. And I created a bit of a fun ritual around it. There was only one fast food-esque place in the area, KFC, which I don't eat a ton of KFC when I'm here in America, but I did when I was in China. And I would go and I would get a nugget and a hot fudge sundae, and you were allowed to bring food in. So I would take the food into the theater, and I watched these movies probably 7 times a piece in the theater. And there was also the fact that the ticket didn't cost very much overall. There was no barrier to entry in that way. It was maybe $1 or $2 USD to go see these movies. So yeah, I found myself going again and again, and it brought me so much joy. And now in retrospect, looking back at that time and then also looking back on those movies, they are some of my favorites. I definitely have other favorites. It's not like they shot to number 1 just because of this experience, but they're up there. I really, really enjoy watching those movies. I get a lot of joy out of them. And they're not exactly the like genre of movie that I typically gravitate towards. Like my other favorites are like You've Got Mail and When Harry Met Sally and stuff like that. So they're not a typical genre for me. It wasn't the genre that drew me in, but I think it was the entire experience. It was the fact that I didn't have the choice about whether I could watch those movies or another movie. I just had those movies. In that limitation, so much joy was produced. So much joy was produced in my experience of those movies, and they're some of my favorite ones as a result. And again, it's less about the genre being something that I gravitate towards, and it's more about the experience of that limitation and the joy that it afforded me. I'm using the camera as a mirror. I don't think it's the best. We're doing it. So this memory got me thinking. It just made me think about what are other situations in my life where I have been similarly limited, like in terms of choice, and have those experiences been more joyful or less joyful? Because typically I would think the more options, the better, right? The more movies I can choose from, the more likely I'm going to be to choose one that I like and that's going to bring me joy. But I'm feeling like that might not be the case. After I thought about the movies, then I started to think about when I was a kid, like in middle school or whatever, and I would go over to my friend's house and we would listen to the Yellow Card Ocean Avenue CD for hours, over and over and over. And maybe we had 4 or 5 CDs to choose from, but it was limited. And those particular ones that we chose to listen to were so special and so joyful as a result. We knew them backwards and forwards. We could sing every single lyric. Again, it's just another case where it feels like limitation, instead of creating pain, creates joy. Now, I want to just say right out the gate that I know that this is incredibly nuanced and that there are certain levels of limitation that of course bring discomfort and real pain. I'm not talking here about like true poverty or not having enough food to eat, not having a bed to sleep in, all of those things. I hope you guys understand where I'm coming from. Basic needs being met aside, I'm just talking about in our day-to-day lives, the amount of choices that we have available to us and whether or not those choices actually bring us more joy or less. I hope that makes sense. Another example would be like when Gilmore Girls was coming out and you would only get 1 episode a week. And one would come out and then you would have to wait. And I mean, pick any TV show that used to come out on TV. This was the experience. And it was a limitation. It was a limitation that anyone who grew up in that time or before that time just had to live with. And, it was kind of like, oh, I wish I could watch the next one. But I wonder, has being able to watch the next one immediately, to binge the whole season right when it comes out, actually added to the joy of the experience of watching a television show? Maybe in the moment. There's less discomfort in the moment. You get to binge the whole thing. It's like kind of fun. Maybe you set aside a night and you do it. But overall, did that limitation of having to wait a week actually add to the joy of the entire experience and actually make those shows that we would watch even better? And I've read articles before and listened to TED Talks around this concept of choice. And so I might be kind of butchering some of the facts here, but we're just friends. We're just talking, right? I can try to link the things that I'm talking about down below if I can find them. It's been a couple years. I remember listening to a TED Talk about choice, and he was talking about this kind of thing, that currently in the world we have so many options and that our happiness only increases up to a certain amount of options, and then after that our happiness starts to decrease. So I think he used the example of like picking out a pair of jeans. It used to be that he would go to the store, there was like 2 or 3 styles of jeans, and he would pick the one that he liked best, and he would go home and he would be pretty happy. He would be pretty satisfied in the jeans that he got. But that with the onslaught, and I think that that's an appropriate word, the onslaught of online shopping and cheap fashion, everything is available to us. Everything is available to us. And for him with jeans, he said he would now go to the store and there's like this cut and this wash and that wash. And do you want it distressed? And which length do you want? And that in his experience, his pleasure, not only in the moment of picking out the jeans, but also in the long run, like the contentment that he would get in the jeans that he had was way less overall. And that there have been studies that show that the more options you have after a certain point. So of course we want a certain amount of freedom, right? A certain amount of freedom is good and joy bringing for us. But after a certain point, too many options has the opposite effect because it creates dissatisfaction. In those instances, when you have so many options to choose from, it increases the likelihood that after you make the purchase or after you do the thing, after you go to the restaurant, that you're left with the feeling, what if? What if I chose the wrong place? What if there was a better, yummier restaurant that I could have gone to? What if there was a better, more perfect cut of jean for me? And those kinds of feelings create dissatisfaction and unhappiness, not only in the moment, but also for the length of the time that we own that item. We'll always like those jeans a little bit less than the jeans that we chose when there were fewer options. And so it just makes me wonder, in this day and age when there are so many choices available to us and so many options, and there are no limitations built in. There are way fewer, as actually probably a better way of saying it, there are way fewer limitations built in to society. If I want to binge a whole season of something when it comes out, I can. If I want to take a month or two to shop for the perfect jeans, I can. And I'm not trying to say that there's anything wrong with taking your time or shopping around or trying to make the best decision, overall. But I'm just wondering if there's a limit to the benefit of that. Price comparison and shopping around, scrolling over Yelp to try to pick the restaurants that you're going to visit when you're in a certain city. Like, it's good to a point, and then it starts being bad. It starts to be a net negative to your experience. Another thing that this guy mentioned who did the TED Talk was how we have lost the ability to be surprised. So for instance, pre-GPS, maybe you were driving around, maybe you were on a road trip or something like that, and the place that you would stop to eat would be totally dependent on what was there when you pulled off the road. And there was this element of the unexpected and the joy that would come from that, the joy of not having everything mapped out, the joy of not being able to Google what's around here, what are they rated, what are people saying about it. And he was saying that having access to all of that information, having access to all of those reviews and just all of that information, again, just robs your experience. It doesn't add to it, or it's more likely that it will take away than add. And it's true, like how often do we go for a drive and just pull off the road and see what's there and explore and kind of have that experience of being mapless, And that's where certain memories come from, certain precious memories of like, yeah, I was driving with my best friend and we pulled off and we found this little cafe and we didn't expect it. Then we built all these memories, and then 20 years down the road, you're like, remember when we were on that road trip and we pulled off and there was that little cafe? You know what I mean? It's like, how much is that happening anymore? How much are we allowing that to happen? And so this got me thinking, if these types of limitations that used to be just so naturally built into our experience of the world, it used to just be that was how TV came out. And for me, that's how many movies were available to me to watch. Or when that guy went to pick out his jeans, it's like, those limitations were there. 10, 20, 30 years ago, no one needed to create the limitations for themselves. They just were built in to society and built into the systems of the world. But it makes me wonder now, if the way that society is set up, and I mean, I'm speaking in super broad strokes, obviously, the way that society is set up doesn't have those limitations inbuilt, and it actually has gone to the other extent where we have an excess of choice, an excess of options, and an excess of freedom, and that maybe it's hurting us. Maybe it's causing an increased sense of dissatisfaction. And so if society, if the way that things are structured from the outside is not going to create those limitations for us, how can we create those limitations for ourselves and take back some of that joy that we've lost, take back some of that freedom that we used to have as a result of being limited? It's hard to see what I'm doing. So it just got me thinking, like, what would happen if I just chose 2 movies or 1 movie and 1 show that I was going to watch over a given period? And that was all that was available to me. Anytime that I wanted to watch a movie or anytime that I wanted to watch a show, I could pick from one of those 2. Or what if I did the same thing with music, picking 2 or 3 albums, and those are the ones that I have access to for 2 months or something like that? Would that not create more joy in my experience overall? When I think about that outside of this context, I'm like, why? Why would I do that? Why would I set that sort of limitation? That sounds annoying and uncomfortable. And why? The light's fading in and out. But in this context, and when I think about the times in my life when I've experienced so much joy, it makes me think that it would be worth the experiment, you know? And it also makes me wonder, like, what other areas of my life do I have an excess of choice, and how could I bring limitations into those ones? Like beyond music and movies and restaurants and those types of things. Would I experience more joy having more limitations in terms of my clothing? Are these 10-item wardrobe people onto something? Maybe part of what they're experiencing is not just the joy in the individual clothing items, but the joy that comes from limitation, the ease of less. There's a girl that I follow who does a lot of like minimalist content. Her name is Madison Gray, and she's just super lovely. If you've never watched her videos, go do it. She is so thoughtful and intentional and just does such a good job of making it feel simple. She's someone who does the 10-item wardrobe. Every time I watch one of those wardrobe videos or even go back and watch, it just tickles something in my fancy. This question of like, what might that be like? And could that possibly bring me more joy than having so much in my closet? You know what I mean? I'll link some of her 10-item wardrobe stuff down below if you're interested. Cat-like reflexes. Does anyone just like have eyebrows and then doesn't have eyebrows? I have eyebrows, but just to a point. And then they've just decided to go the way of the buffalo. I feel like that's a hormonal thing. Isn't that related to hypothyroidism or something? Another way, let's just talk about this. Another way that excess of choice is robbing us, I guess it's not exactly choice, but excess of information. Excess of information. I don't know how people do it, but I've had to get off of like all social media and cut myself off from all news because it's too much. My nervous system does not do well having access to so much information and so much all the time. And I found that anytime that I would want to, I don't know, just scroll on Instagram or something like that, I didn't have control over what information would come across my path. That's another piece of it. The reason why I like YouTube and the reason why I stay on here is because I feel like I have a little bit more autonomy in terms of the type of information that I take in, and I'm not just like bombarded. But in the Instagram feed or whatever it is, you have no idea what sort of posts and news and stuff you're going to come across, you know, people's drama and people's tragedies and all of that. And I do think it's good to be connected. 100% I think it's good to be connected. But I also think there's something about being connected to the tragedies of the entire world when you don't have the ability to do anything about it, and what that does to the psyche, what that does to the soul. It's one thing if you're there on the ground in a place where tragedy is happening, or it's one thing to be connected within your community and be there when people are hurting and be there when people are happy, to celebrate together and to mourn together and all of that. Bring a meal, do all the things. But I feel like there's something that happens when we're connected to the tragedy of the whole world and there's nothing that we can do. It just leaves you feeling helpless. And so I just think that even having the limitation of, like, goodness gracious, Laurel Ingalls Wilder, she just had to hold and handle the tragedy of her immediate vicinity, you know what I mean? And it was enough. It's enough. It's enough to just hold the suffering of your small little community and not to have access to news from the whole world, because then there's always going to be bad news. It's going to feel like the world is falling apart when the reality is you just have access to too much information. I don't know. These are just things that I wonder about. And there might be a time when I come back to social media and have the capacity to be more connected than I have currently been. And I know that some people, like, it's a value to know all that stuff. But I just found for me, it was really hurting my ability to be present in my life and to be a good mom. Yeah, because my mental health, my anxiety was through the roof. And I've experienced so much benefit from creating that limitation of not having access to everything. Look who's back again. I don't know, y'all. Like I said, there might be a time when my capacity increases and I have the ability to be more connected. But for now, I just had to acknowledge my own limitations and how that influx of news and information was putting me in a bad way and hurting those around me because of how it affected my mental health, my anxiety levels, all of that. And that overall, I'm able to be more effective in my community. I'm actually able to be here for people who are suffering in my vicinity and provide real help if I'm not bogged down by the news. That's just been my experience. So anyways, I would love to hear from you guys in the comments about what you think and what is your experience with limitation. Do you have any memories from childhood or college, or I don't know, sometimes I feel like it's easier to see these things in retrospect. But yeah, what are things in your life that are limited, either naturally or on purpose? And how does that affect your day-to-day life? What sort of limitations do you give yourself? I would love if we could have a conversation down below. I feel like there's such a benefit when we all share and it's not just one person speaking. So in y'all's experience, does limitation bring more joy or less? Let me know.